The raven came at dusk, its feathers the color of old iron, its eye a hard bead that caught the candlelight in Tywin Lannister's solar. The tower of the hand smelled of boiled ink and wax and clean steel. He had forbidden perfumes and soft cushions in this chamber years ago. Men did not rule comfortably. They ruled with a straight back, with a clear head, and with letters opened in stillness, not fanfare. He broke the seal with his thumbnail. The wax spider of the master of whisperers cracked, and a fine strand of his patience frayed with it. Varys had been gone 2 years. No matter, the spider left webs in men and in walls. Some messengers could not help but carry strands with them. The message was short: Dragonstone. 3 words that were a place, a claim, and a threat. She has come. Tywin did not look up. The thin whistle of a brazier's breath filled the room. On the coals a poker warmed like a sword that had forgotten its war. He read the words again as if they would grow prudent with repetition. They did not. "Send for Lord Kevin," he said, folding the parchment once, "and for Pycelle and Qyburn, and Ser Adam Marbrand, if he has returned to the city. Now, not after prayers." The steward bowed and fled. The hand of the king set the letter down beside the ledger of grain and the parchment tally of coin bars in the vaults of the rock. Dragons did not eat gold, but the realm did, and the realm was the only beast he meant to keep alive. By the time Kevin came, the brazier was red as a lion's eye, and the sky beyond the windows had settled into bruised purple. Kevin took in his brother's face and the folded letter and did not need to ask. "It's her." "It is," Tywin said. "Sit." They stood. Tywin moved the poker to the hearthstones, laid parchment flat, placed his palm on the warm wood of the table that had survived 3 kings and 1 boy who had never learned to sit straight. Tommen was not his brother. Thank the gods for small mercies. "Read," Tywin said. He passed the letter. Kevin's mouth tightened. "Dragonstone. With ships?" said Qyburn from the door, entering with the ease of a man who had learned to appear before he was called. He wore gray, and an apologetic smile that never altered the distance of his eyes. "Gray sails and black, and some in the yellow of sunspear, if my little birds speak true, and a sigil of a 3-headed dragon. No one mistakes that." "And dragons?" Kevin asked, voice flat. Qyburn spread his hands. "If one believes sailors." Pause. "And I do not. I only believe coin. I believe the weight of it." Tywin said nothing until Pycelle shuffled in with the old habit of importance, bowing and wheezing and gathering up enough breath to make his words sound learned. Your grace," he corrected himself, catching Tywin's eye. "Hand, there is talk that there is a woman upon Dragonstone who calls herself Queen," Tywin cut in. "That is not talk, that is fact. What is talk concerns the size of her teeth and whether she breathes fire. We will treat the talk as smoke and the fact as flame." 3 dragons, Qyburn said softly. "By most accounts." Pycelle's beard trembled. "The last dragon died." "Why?" "Before I entered the citadel. The last pitiful, misshapen, stunted thing in King's Landing died," Tywin said. "A paper tiger fed in cellars. It is a comfort to fools to misname a problem. Men named my father's strength wisdom, and in so doing forgave his softness. I have no use for such comfort. If she has beasts, we will break them or break her, but we will not be surprised." He looked to Kevin. "Randyll Tarly is still in the Reach? Drilling men at Horn Hill and marching where Lord Mace points him." "And Lord Mace points where Olenna wills," Tywin said. "The Tyrell alliance stands?" Kevin nodded. "Marjorie sits the queen beside your grandson and plays at virtues that a city swallows like sweets. The Reach grain flows, the red wine fleet is at anchor. All is even." "Even," Tywin repeated. "There is no still water in a storm. It only looks still until the keel bites." He tapped the letter with 1 finger. "She is a storm. We will not meet her in open water." He sent Kevin to summon the red wines from the arbor with haste and promises, and to order Randyll Tarly to heel to King's Landing by the Rose Road with crack troops, leaving the green boys to keep fields. He sent ravens to Old Town for the Conclave's white ravens. Winter had stretched long enough that the city had learned to speak of it without fear. He sent riders to Duskendale and Rosby, to the outlying keeps and river ferries where coin bought loyalty that banners could not reach. And alone, when the servants had cleared and the candles had been trimmed so they did not gutter, he stood by the window and looked east. He saw only a dark line where sea met sky and where once a boy had thought the horizon was a wall. There were no walls. There were merely men with the will to act before others did. He did not think of Tyrion. He did not think of the last time he had been seated in this chair with a crossbow pointed at his belly and a son's mouth curled in hurt that had sharpened itself into something like courage. He had laid too much steel between himself and guilt to let it cut now. The quarrel had never flown. Jaime had arrived on light feet at a heavy hour, and for once had not been too late. It had not changed the distance between father and son. Some distances were measured in disappointments and were their own oceans. "Bring me Qyburn's plans," he told the steward when he finally left the window. "All of them." The man bowed as if Tywin had asked for bread, not for a new alphabet of war. On Dragonstone, the wind was the first thing Daenerys noticed. It knifed through the saddle leather smell of ships and the baking salt of the strand and carried with it the taste of an old home she had never set foot in. The clatter of the unsullied disembarking did not break the island's silence so much as give it rhythm. She had dreamed of this place as other children dreamed of mothers' faces, but dreams were obliging and left out the chill that found her bone. "Not the Red Keep," Tyrion Lannister said at her shoulder, his voice bright and dry as wine poured onto slate. "But it has the better table." She turned. The imp's eyes were red from the wind and the salt and a night spent talking ships and siege and supply, but he smiled as though the cold did not matter. He had told her that winter in Westeros was a thing a man learned to wear like a shirt, not to think upon as something that could be changed by will. She had learned such lessons hard. Missandei was a soft shadow at her elbow. "There are wards in the stone, not sorcery, carvings. Names, your kin's names. Carve mine beside them," Daenerys said. She climbed the stairs to the castle with the wind in her hair and felt her dragons move in the air above as naturally as a woman feels the shift of her own hand. Drogon shrieked, and the sound rolled along the cliff face like a wave striking stone. Grey Worm met them in the courtyard with the precise bow of a man who measured respect by inches. "The island is secure. There were no Lannister men." "They do not hold it," Tyrion said, "but they have never forgotten it. There are caverns beneath. The Targaryens mined obsidian from the belly of the island. Dragonglass." He glanced at her, a small, testing look. "There are some in the north who want it very badly." "I have not come to make friends with men who won't kneel," Daenerys said, but her voice was thoughtful. "Some men won't kneel because their knees have learned only to stand," Tyrion said. "Others because snow has frozen the joints." He smiled. "There are many ways to answer the world's poor posture." She should have been angry at the jest. She was not. She had brought armies and dragons and a will proud enough to cover a continent like a cloak. Yet the first step on Westeros' stone had reminded her that stone did not soften for will. It had to be broken or shaped or walked upon until it yielded. She would choose which of those she would be. In the great hall, the painted table waited as if a ghost had been sitting at its edge a moment before and had only just risen. It was a map of a country that had refused for centuries to be one thing except at sword's edge. Daenerys put her hands on its dark wood and felt every hill and river in the grain. The world had given her deserts and cities that pretended to be kinder than they were. This, at least, was honest. A country cut into itself and still expecting to be whole. Varys came in with the draft the sea left on men, smelling faintly of salt and secrecy. He bowed, and she noted that he had learned to bow like a man who had once bowed to her father and not forgotten that posture could become habit. "Lion's Gate, King's Landing," he said, setting out little markers carved like ships. "The Red Wine Fleet remains at the arbor. The Ironborn are teeth that bite whichever hand dangles meat. There are ravens in the sky between Old Town and the capital like flies to a wound." "Does your wound fester?" Tyrion asked. Varys' smile was thin. He binds it with cloth of common sense and stitches of coin. Tywin Lannister was not made hand by accident. Tywin Lannister, Daenerys said, tasting the name. She had heard it in whispered associate taverns, spat with wine and prayers. She had heard it said under the breath of a dying Lazarene man who did not know he would die in the next hour and wanted that name to be as far from his tongue as possible before he did. He lives. Tyrion looked at the table and not at her. He does. Your father. Unfortunately, he rubbed at his cheek. It was almost otherwise. Another tale. The corner of his mouth went up. A worse world for you, a better one for Cersei. There are worse worlds, Daenerys said. I have seen them. She turned to the open doors. The wind had teeth in it, but it also had the clean taste of plans that had not yet touched blood. We cut the head from the snake. The snake you see writhing is not the head, Tyrion said mildly. Tywin is the head. Cersei is the coils. Cut one, and you may find you have only made the other hungrier. Advice. She made the word delicate with effort. Land not in King's Landing with fire. Land with law, he said. You have dragons. Men will always say you won with dragons. Let them also say you won with bread. Let them say you forbade burning granaries. Let them say you made fewer widows than Tywin. The Reach will not move for you if you burn their harvest. Will they move for me at all? She asked, honest. Not while their daughter wears the crown, Varys said. The Queen of Thorns has thorns enough for all of us, but she cares for her rose before she cares for the garden. Dorne, Missandei asked. Prince Doran's gout will never keep pace with a march, Varys murmured. He will watch. Illyria Sand snarls, but she cannot bite while Myrcella sits in Sunspear under careful eyes and careful wine. He is too cautious to risk a Lannister hostage for a war he is not sure to win. Then who? Daenerys asked. Men and women who have learned what peace costs when the wrong men hold it, Tyrion said. The Ironborn who are tired of bleeding for brothers they hate. The lords of the river who remember a wedding with knives in the soup. Poets and fishers and smugglers and shopkeepers and the men who build walls and the women who sell bread. I cannot put them on your side of the table. He touched the painted table lightly, as if the wood might bite him. But if you declare the small folk free to coin their own lives without being spent by Lannisters and Freys and Boltons, the air itself will lean toward you. Air does not win battles. No Tyrion's Mail. But it fills sails. The first of those sails met wildfire within the week. Euron Greyjoy came out of the mist south of Driftmark with a grin like a broken blade. His masts jangling with bells and bones that sang their own sea songs. Behind him, further than sight, another fleet lay quiet among the shoals, but those ships did not fly Kraken or Rose. They flew no colors at all, and they rode deep, patient as traps. The Ironborn fell on Yara Greyjoy's line like wolves scenting lamb, and for an hour the night was screams and rope and salt. Daenerys watched from the seaward tower with her knuckles white on the stone because every council Tyrion had given held her dragon's leashes tighter than any chain. The instinct to burn was a living thing, paced inside her with Drogon's weight. Not yet, Tyrion said. Not for fish thief on fish thief. Let them tire. Euron will not tire. Her voice was a promise. Tywin will tire him for us, Tyrion said, and then the sea went green. Beneath the ironborn hulls a quiet warmth woke like a mouth and ate wood and men and metal indiscriminately. Fires opened under keels with the greed of old gods. A sheet of emerald tore across black water with the speed of a rumor, and ships became torches, mast spears, men the briefest flares of life. Fire ran with such mindless purity it could almost have been holy. It was not. Wildfire, Missandei breathed. She had learned the word with the careful exactness she gave to all the bitter new sounds this land required. Qyburn's teeth, Tyrion said. He did not look pleased to be right. Daenerys's jaw hurt from clenching. How? Sinks with lead, rises with a pull, Tyrion said, voice small in the wind. Euron draws you where he thinks he is strong. Tywin draws him where he knows he is weak. Daenerys turned, and the urge to fly and break and burn was a storm that cracked her like a whip. But there was a slower burn in her too, lit by slavers and sands and cities that had thought her easy to measure until she showed them new rulers. She swallowed the storm. Euron cut hard for open sea. Half his wings burned, and the silent fleet that had laid among the shoals like fish turned and slipped away like men who had never been there. The bells on Euron's mast screamed. The next day brought ravens. Some were black, some white. The white ones were heavier. In the Red Keep, the one Tommen loved because it had windows he could look out of and imagine a city he could walk, Marjorie Tyrell read with her lips pressed together until they whitened. She had learned to be queen in a city that demanded sweetness and then bit the hand that fed it. She was, Tywin conceded, very good at not letting it see when it had broken skin. Winter, Tommen said, as if he were learning a new word from a book with gold on its spine. It says winter. A pretty bird, Cersei said from the door where she had paused to hear before she arrived. Her voice had a gentleness polished by use to something that could pass for care. White ravens are pretty birds. They do not lie, do they? Not like little birds. Do not lie, your grace? Pycelle repeated, bobbing like a fishing line. Tywin kept his eyes on the map. The Conclave sends winter, so the realm will stop pretending it is not already here. The grain we have is the grain we will have. The city eats a field a day. Then the city should eat less, Cersei said. It is good for kings to learn hunger. It teaches them desperation, Marjorie said gently. If one cannot sleep for an empty belly, one does not dream of law. It teaches them to cling, Cersei said, smiling. She went to Tommen and touched his hair. We will keep them safe. We will keep you safe. Tywin set a marker at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. We will keep them alive. That will do. He looked at Randyll Tarly where the man stood as straight and lean as a spear. Lord Randyll, your task is our bread. You will not chase horsemen who fly and vanish. You will escort grain. You will move it by night. You will burn it rather than lose it. You will not arrange more than 60 wagons in a train. You will stagger them. If you find a woman with 2 hungry sons and she tells you she has seen 3 dragons, you will assume there are 3, though you will not tell your men so. Fear is a fire that eats orders. Douse it. Randyll bowed. As the hand commands. And the city? Marjorie asked, the sunlight off her hair a more honest brightness than any candlelight. If the Dragon Queen comes to its gates? She will not, Tywin said. She will strike where she thinks I am weak. She will find that I am less predictable than she is accustomed to. Cersei laughed softly, a scorn that had learned to clothe itself. She is accustomed to fire and adoration. We will give her neither. She set her fingers on Tommen's shoulder. My father always pretends to be an anvil until he is ready to be the hammer. Tywin did not look at her. He addressed the table, the only court he trusted. She will send men to take the rock. Jaime looked up from the scorpion laid in parts along the benches like the bones of a strange beast. Qyburn had built the first, and Jaime, to his own mild surprise, loved the feel of its weight and the simple logic of its arcs. It was a sword writ large. You did not need 2 hands to read its lines. The rock. She thinks it is pride, Tywin said. It is also coin. I have already moved the coin. Let her take stone. We will make her pay for it. She will expect a trick from you, Jaime said. Then I will give her 2, Tywin said. When word came 3 weeks later that Grey Worm had raised a banner atop the sea-facing wall of Casterly Rock, when the Sunset Sea's spray had powdered unsullied shields with salt, and an old Lannister castellan lay dead in a gatehouse that had been taken from a poster no man had used since a previous Lord of the Rock had sneaked in and out for women too poor to set foot in a golden hall, Tywin took no joy in being right. He took the next letter. Empty granaries, Marjorie said quietly, scanning Varys's hand. Empty cellars. Empty vaults. Not empty, Tywin said. Moved. The Unsullied ate fish and pride and held their castle of legends. Meanwhile, Randyll Tarly's men ate salt beef in ditches as narrow as their patience, guarding 20 wagons at a time that bent like a long spine across the reach. The dragons came then, at last, not to King's Landing but to the fields where bread grew. Drogon darkened the sun as a storm does, leading his brothers through air that had never learned to hate fire, and fire reclaimed what men had taken. The Dothraki rode like wind sharpened into knives. They fell upon the wagons halfway along the Rose Road, and the earth drank. A man might ride a day through the Reach and see only fat cattle and slow rivers and never think that such land could learn to scream. It did. Randyll Tarly did not run. He put his men on the far side of shallow water, and he anchored them like stones. Pikes in front, archers close, cavalry as a knife ready to cut bread, not wave in the air like a fool's flag. The first pass of dragonfire took the men's breath and gave it back as smoke. The second met wet hides thrown across long frames, and the fire flared and slid to ground. The third, on the third pass, scorpions hidden in the folds of the earth spoke. Great bolts rose with the suddenness of truths and with their cruelty. One shaft glanced along black scales, drew blood like rain from a storm cloud, and Drogon screamed as if a city had cried at once. Daenerys clung to him with legs that had learned dragon long ago and with a grip that had learned men too. She guided him up, where air was clean and plans looked foolish. Below, a Lannister line held. The Dothraki cut it and it closed. They cut it again and it closed again because Randyll allowed men to die. Exactly where he needed them to, and none a pace farther back. When at last Daenerys brought Drogon down in a fury that turned a screaming stand of oaks to black fingers, she landed not on a whim but on a calculation of wind and wound. She walked through burned air with her hair whipping, and her face was the face of a young woman who had been many things in the last years but had never been told no by fate and meant to teach it manners. "Yield," she said to the captured men. "Kneel." Most did. Some did not. Randyll Tarly did not. "Bend the knee, my lord," Tyrion urged quietly, too low to be heard by any but Daenerys and the bound man. "We can find a way to call this honor if you insist." "My honor does not need your words," Randyll said. He had a dignity that did not care if it was about to die. "A Tarly bends the knee for his liege, not to a foreign girl on a lizard." Tyrion shut his eyes on the old insult. "Do not do this." Daenerys's gaze was level. "Then stand." She burned him and his son where all could see. Fire made an end that men carried to their tents as a caution or a curse, depending on what they had chosen for themselves. Tyrion's mouth tasted of ash for days. In the Red Keep, Tywin listened to the account without allowing the satisfaction in him to show. This was not childish glee at an enemy's mistake. It was the cool, private assent that the rules of the board were still rules that worked. "She has given me a thing," he said. "Lords whisper, men talk at fires. Grain merchants put their heads together like crows. She is fire and she is far away. I am here with bread and coin." Jaime said, "And scorpions." "And scorpions," Tywin allowed. He looked to Qyburn. "More of them, smaller, many. They will not kill a dragon easily, but they make flying cost. They make it a choice, not an instinct." "Your lordship," Qyburn said, smiling. "It is a pleasure to work for a mind that gives permission before it asks." Cersei's smile did not tremble. "You are modest, Qyburn. My father offers permission because he knows he can leash you if need be." Wildfire was pretty. "It will not become policy. It will become one of many options, as it should," Tywin said. "Policy is what one builds when one has many options and chooses the few that work." Varys slid into the council as if he had been there always. "There is another option that comes walking on its own legs to your gates." "What legs?" Tywin asked. "The North's," Varys said. "A Stark, a bastard, a resurrected rumor who sits a king in Winterfell." Pycelle sputtered so violently he had to clutch the table. "Reserve, what nonsense is this?" "The sort that travels faster than ravens," Varys said. "Jon Snow. He has written to Dragonstone for dragonglass and permission to mine it. The Lady of Dragonstone appears to be listening." "Dragonglass?" Marjorie asked. "Obsidian," Qyburn said softly. "The old books say it kills the, well, Knight's Tales." "Northern tales," Cersei said, bored. "Snow and monsters. The North is always looking for a new word to justify itself." "The North," Tywin said. is always looking for a way to not be the North. He considered. If a Stark wants stone from Dragonstone, he will get it. Let him. If a Dragon Queen gives it to him, men will say she thinks of the realm. Let them say it. In another mouth, a truth is an accident. It is still useful. Jaime looked an odd mix of amused and troubled. A resurrected rumor. Varys smiled blandly. A rumor that saved a girl at the Eyrie and a wildling host beyond the wall, and then betrayed their general at his own pyre, only to come back with more snow in his eyes than he went into the flames with. It is a very dramatic rumor, Sir Jaime. Men are more easily ruled by drama than bread, Tywin said. That is why we must be efficient with bread. When the Raven reached Dragonstone with a promise of safe passage for a northern delegation to King's Landing under banners of parley and truce, Daenerys read it twice. The second time, she felt the hair on her arms prickle as if a winter gust had found its way through stone. Tywin invites us to talk, Tyrion said, leaning in the embrasure, one heel roughed against old stone as if he were scratching a new memory into it. He does not waste time on ceremony. He does not waste time at all. Will he waste us? Daenerys asked. She did not fear trap. She had learned to look for them and to break them. She feared something quieter. A man who gave her a place to put her anger, and then took it from under her hand and replaced it with a problem to think about. She did not like thinking about him. It made her aware of the children the world had refused to let her be. Not if I can help it, Tyrion said. If my father kills me at a table, he admits he needed to. He is too proud to admit it. He hesitated. He will try to move you without touching you. He likes to do that. I burned men, she said softly, not looking at him. Yes, Tyrion said, and he will make of their burnt bones a ladder. We will not climb it. They came to King's Landing by morning on a day when the sky was a hard, clear blue that made everything beneath it look more honest than it was. The city thrummed, bristling as if it had grown quills overnight. Scorpions at the gates, scorpions on towers and on the city walls. Men at the levers whose hands were steady from practice. Qyburn had builded as he had been told. Dany's dragons circled once and then banked out to sea at her whistle, leaving the city to look at its fear without a target to release it upon. In the throne room, she walked with her chin high and her hands loose at her sides, as she had learned in pyramids where the air smelled of old gods, and in palaces where men had thought her a decoration until they discovered she could be a blade. Tywin met her not at the foot of the throne, but in a side chamber that had once been small and had become large when kings decided that hearing was difficult with too many people in the room. He stood, because he would not be seen to sit before her. He did not bow. He did not insult. He was a man who had decided long ago that ceremony was a tool and not a prison, and he used it finely. Your Grace, he said. Lord Tywin, she returned. They regarded each other like two headsmen examining each other's axes. Tyrion stood at Dany's right and felt the old itch in his bones that was equal parts fear and contempt and a small, unwelcome admiration. His father had grown older since last they had been in the same room. The skin at his jaw hung a little looser. The white in his hair had taken not just the color but some of the arrogance. But his eyes were as they had always been, clear, cold, and fixed on a future he meant to write himself. We are told, Tywin said, that the world has made a new queen at Dragonstone. The world did not make me anything, Daenerys said. It tried to unmake me and failed. Men admire that, Tywin said. They like to believe that what the world does to them is unfair. It pleases them to see it done to someone else who survives. Men like bread, Tyrion said softly, and we mean to bring it to the places your lines cannot reach. Tywin nodded once, conceding the point as if the board had required it. Bread goes where coin flows where confidence sits. He folded his hands on the table. I will not pretend the city does not fear your dragons, nor will I pretend that fear is not useful to me. Fear, in small measures, is medicine. In large, it kills the patient. You speak like a maester, Daenerys said. I speak like a man who must keep a city of 500,000 from thinking that panic is an answer, Tywin said. You have fire. I have walls. Fire eats walls if you let it. Walls turn fire aside if you plan. That is the game you want to play." He lifted his brows just slightly. "Or are you here to make another sort of offer?" Varys's voice from the shadows. "He knows my queen." "Knows what?" Tywin asked, a mildness that almost fooled Tyrion. And then Tyrion saw the small check in the heartbeat between question and calm and knew his father had guessed the shape of the answer an hour ago and prepared rooms in himself to receive it. "Of the dead," Daenerys said. "Of the army beyond the wall. Of the night that walks." Tywin's mouth did something like soften. "The world is full of men who will sell me truths. I buy them all and let time redeem the ones that deserve it." He inclined his head the merest fraction. "I have received convincing testimony that the North's ghost stories have grown flesh." "We will need dragonglass," Tyrion said. "We have it. We will need time." He spread his hands. "We have less of that." Tywin tapped the table once. "You will have truce. You will have safe passage on the King's Road. Not for armies large enough to break a county in their stride, but for companies enough to be the bone and marrow of a force. You will have grain from the Crownland stores while supplies last." He looked at Daenerys. "In return, you will not burn my city. You bargain with the fate of the world," she said, anger sharp as the sea wind at Dragonstone. "I bargain with everything," Tywin said. "It is the only reason I have anything to bargain with." He paused. "And because I believe I am not bargaining with the fate of the world. I believe I am buying time to keep it from ending." Tyrion's throat had gone dry. "And after, Tywin said. "We will see if kings and queens learn to talk as if the chairs they sit in do not grant them the right to shout merely because they are chairs." He regarded Daenerys the way a general might look at a hill. He meant to take not today but someday when the wind changed. "There will be a reckoning. I prefer to have it when the world is not breaking under us." He flicked his eyes at Tyrion. "If my son is advising you, he will have told you that the best plans are those that leave the worst choices for last." "He has told me many things," Daenerys said. "I have told her to listen when you speak sense," Tyrion said, "and to ignore you when you speak pride dressed in strategy." For the first time Tywin really looked at his son. It was a cool, assessing, almost weary look, and it hit Tyrion the way the last handful of winter slush thrown by a carriage will hit a man who is not quick enough to step aside. He put his face in order and lifted his chin, and in that moment the old family resembled itself. Pride and stubbornness in 3 different shapes, arranged around a table as if the wood remembered them and liked their friction. The truce held because Tywin wanted it to and because Daenerys led it. The city exhaled. Men on the walls slept better knowing that if they woke at night it would be to piss and not to burn. Grain trickled north along roads that were never good when they were good and were now rutted and mean. A company of Lannister spears marched under Jaime to Winterfell with banners furled and faces set as if they could will the north to be summer by refusing to wear furs until they could no longer feel their fingers. Brienne of Tarth waited at the gates of Winterfell for them with a jaw that looked carved by a smith who had grown angry and then forgave himself by polishing what he had made. "Sir Jaime," she said, "you came." "I was sent," he said, "by my father, which for once is not a curse." He looked at the walls. They looked back as if they had been waiting for him for 100 years. "The snow here makes your breath sound different," he said, and she, who loved truth more than wit, nodded as if he had said something worth keeping. Sansa Stark met them in the hall that had warmed kings and beggars alike and in which ghosts were never far from any shoulder. She wore the North like a cloak now, not a disguise. Heavy fabrics, plain jewels, the gravity of a woman who had learned the price of seeming light. Her eyes, though, remembered everything. She looked at the lion banners and did not bare her teeth. She looked at Jaime and did not flinch. She looked at Brienne, and there was a small easing in the lines of her mouth that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with trust. "We fight the dead," she said. "After, we will settle the living." "After," Jaime said, letting the word fill his chest and make promises to his ribs it might not keep. Jon Snow returned that night from the wall with a face that had learned not to be surprised by miracles and still, stubbornly, was. He had seen a dragon. He had put his hand on black glass that had waited for his hand for centuries. He had spoken with a woman whose hair moved like fire and whose promises moved like knives. He had found a word for what the realm needed that was not crown. He had not found a way to convince men that word was enough. He found instead a room in Winterfell with the smells of meat and wool and steel, and he stood by the fire and let the heat find his bones like a map. Jaime watched him and understood, in his way, why men followed some men the way they followed songs. Jon did not look as if he thought he was important. He looked as if he had been given a task by someone too sorrowful to do it, and had taken it up not because he wanted it but because it was there and it was heavy. "You are the Lannister who killed the king," Jon said without heat. "I am," Jaime said, "and the Lannister who did not let his father be killed in a privy." Jon's mouth curved for the first time. "I suppose we all have our prides." He looked down at the hearth. "My father," he stopped, "the man who raised me, Eddard Stark, believed that a man's word was a sword he carried in the open. I have learned that sometimes you must sheath it to keep it from getting dull in the air." "Don't sheath it too long," Jaime said, and the corner of Jon's mouth moved again. The dead came 2 weeks later, and speech became useless for a while. Winterfell filled with the low thunder of men breathing and creatures that did not, with the high brittle sounds of fear trying to sing itself into courage and failing, with the steady workman clatter of blacksmiths who had slept 3 hours out of 30. Scorpions stood along the walls beside catapults loaded with barrels whose thin wooden staves sweated green. Tywin had sent pyromancers north, and Sansa had allowed them, though the smell of their stores made her think of her father's head atop the walls of a different city and the taste of bile that had filled her mouth then. Daenerys came with dragons when the moon was a pale ghost and the night had a sharpness that cut men's beards. She had not wanted to be here. She had wanted to end a war in the south and then be generous. But that was a child's desire for a world that let gifts arrive in the right order. She had learned that order belonged to men who made it, not men who asked it. She flew before dawn. Drogon's shadow passed over the white waste like a cloud that had forgotten its softness. Rhaegal roared in a voice that woke something in Jon he did not have words for. Viserion wheeled and snapped playfully at his brother and then stilled, sensing what waited beyond the pines. A black line that moved without breath and without thought except one. They came like memory does, all at once and then refusing to leave. The first white to claw up the slope of Winterfell's outer works had a face that might have been a woman's once, and a hand held out as if to ask for bread. The second had lost most of its face and brought only teeth to the wall. The third wore a guard's tattered surcoat from a keep lost days ago and still held his pike as if it mattered to him to be neat in death. Behind them a mass, a tide, a patience, a hunger. Fire worked. Dragonglass worked. Valyrian steel worked. But none of those lasted as long as hunger did. Jaime fought beside a man whose nose had been broken twice and who fought like his nose would be broken again and did not mind. Brienne's blade moved with the logic of a prayer. The hound cursed on the wall and cursed the fire and used it anyway, the world reduced to a few stubborn choices that became him. Sansa stood in the God's Wood with a knife she hated and gave orders she hated less. Arya vanished into the dark like a promise a woman makes to herself and keeps. Jon fought until he stopped understanding the shape of time. He fell into a rhythm with Longclaw, and the rhythm did not care for names. A dead man came at him with a jaw unhinged, and Jon thought of the mouth of the world and how it never stopped eating. Then he heard a horn and looked up. The Night King stood at the edge of the forest with a calm that mocked winter, and around him the air felt like the silence before a man speaks something he has decided on and will not be moved from. He lifted his hand, and dead men rose inside Winterfell's own dead, which had been carefully laid and not burned because there had not been time. The dead in the crypts answered a call older than stone. Sansa, in her God's Wood, felt the ground shift under her feet with an obscenity so old it felt like a child's fear. She swallowed it and kept speaking, voice hard as the ice on the well. Daenerys saw the king at the forest's edge and dove. The scorpions on Winterfell's walls woke like beasts startled in their dens. Trained men loosed, trained men loaded. Bolts went wide in the confusion, and one clanged off Drogon's shoulder with a noise like a church bell. Daenerys pressed her legs, and Drogon knew the command better than any man. Banked and came again with fire that turned the tree's frost to steam and then to nothing. The Night King walked on through steam, untouched, and lifted his hand again. Rhaegal screamed. The sound was pain and surprise and anger, and it bit Jon in the gut. He saw, high above, an arc of cold light. A spear of ice, thrown clean as a story, took Rhaegal at the wing joint. The dragon fought air as if it were enemy and then did not fight anything. He fell behind the ridge, and the sound of his crash was the sound of a door slamming in a large house. Jon ran without knowing he was running. When he reached the ridge, he fell to his knees among snow churned to slush and black with blood. Rhaegal lay like a fallen mountain. His eye, still bright, still green, found Jon. Jon put his hand against the hot scale and said something that was not words. The dragon breathed once, twice, then stilled. Jon stood. The Night King was walking toward the heart of Winterfell now, slow and sure. As if the world were a staircase, he was descending at a measured pace for the benefit of spectators. Jon made to go at him, and something like a wall of air pressed him back. The tide of dead, the reach of the enemy's calm, the limits of his own body. He lifted his sword anyway. He had never been good at giving up. It ended not with a cleverness but with a woman's choice. Arya Stark had taken a face that did not belong to her and moved across roofs and along lines of shadow that men did not think about because they were not important until they were. She leapt because in the end all things were leaps. From childhoods to duties, from duties to deaths, from deaths to the stories men told to make sense of what they had done. The Night King turned, and his hand closed on her throat as neatly as a man pinching the wick of a candle. Her knife fell and caught in her other hand and went into him with a surety that was almost gentle. When he broke, he did it all at once, not under protest. The dead fell around the walls like forgotten things dropped by a god called to supper. The cry that went up from living throats was small, and then loud, and then small again, because no sound men made could fill what had empty. Out of the earth. Winterfell burned its dead for 2 days, and men slept standing. Daenerys stood alone at the pyres, hair smelling of smoke, thinking not of old kings but of a dragon's eye and the weight of a choice. Jon came to her and found words difficult. She put a hand brief and light on his shoulder and was surprised that both of them did not flinch. "You fought," she said. "I don't know what else to do," he said. "When it's over, I can't sleep." "When it's over," she said, "we will find a way to make it more than over." He looked at her and saw in her not only the fire he had expected, but a toughness that had learned to accommodate cold. The North was not the first winter she had encountered. He nodded. They did not speak of kneeling that night. There were other angles to take. Back in King's Landing, Tywin read the ravens with the efficiency of a man taking inventory after a storm. He set aside loss with the same care he set aside victory. He sent orders north without flourish. Grain, carpenters, masons, salt. He did not ask if they were enough. He knew they would not be. He sent them anyway. Cersei watched him with an expression Tywin had learned when she was 10 and wanted a toy she had been told would not be good for her, and decided that being good was a story other people told to make themselves more comfortable. "You sent them food," she said. "To the wolves." "I sent food to men who bled for a realm I mean to keep," he said. "The difference between wolves and men is sometimes only dinner." "They will come back stronger," she said. "The dragon whore will come back with them." "Likely," Tywin said. "I would rather fight a woman who has learned limits than one who has not. She has learned she can bleed. That is the first lesson pride needs." She smiled, small and feral. "I have never bled." "You bled a child," he said. It was cruel, he did not care. He needed her off balance. "You bled a good son out of your womb." He did not say Joffrey's name. It was a waste of breath to involve him in anything but cautionary tales. "Your good son stands in my way," she said. "Your golden boy. He has learned to kneel to a giant woman and to listen when a northern girl talks. It's very touching." "Jaime does as I bid," Tywin said. "When I bid it. He will come south when I call him." He looked to Qyburn. "We beguiled dragons. We hit one. That means we can hit another. More scorpions. More cleverness. And wildfire? Qyburn asked. Silky. No, Tywin said. Not for cities. Not for people who already fear us too easily. Save it for sea. He sent the order to the arbor. The red wine fleet moved as he told it to. The Ironborn harried. Euron taunted. It was a comfort to Tywin to know that some men were as predictable as hunger. When the Northern Host and the Dragon Queen and the River Lords and the Vale Banners and the remainder of the Unsullied and Dothraki began their slow, deliberate draw south, the roads woke like spiders' webs touched with dew. Taverns filled. Priests shouted. Prostitutes did better trade than any general. Tyrion rode near the front with a face that had learned to be composed and a heart that had not. He had a father ahead of him and a queen at his side and a world that wanted a thing it could not name yet. He drank less than men thought and more than was good for him. They met not at King's Landing's gate, but on the burned plain of blackened stubble south of the Blackwater, where once Stannis had learned that ships and law and will were not enough when a city had a man like Tywin and a river had a secret like green fire. It was Jon's idea. No walls, he said. No excuses. We speak where any man can hear if he chooses to stand close enough. Any man, Sansa said dryly. If he chooses to risk catching a stray quarrel from a twitchy Lannister, then they'll stand a little farther away, Jon said. They'll still hear. Word travels best through men who were almost killed while listening. Tywin came with a guard small enough to pretend it was not a guard and large enough to be one if it needed to. Margaery rode beside Tommen, whose face had lengthened and whose eyes had learned not to ask permission to look serious. Cersei came because she would not be left. Olenna Tyrell came because she would not be denied. Varys came because he always did. Daenerys came with dragons in the sky and feet on the ground. She wore no crown. She did not need one. The air did that for her. Tyrion looked like a man approaching a cliff and choosing to walk along it rather than jump. Your Grace, Tywin said to Daenerys. He did not say queen, and the absence was a courtesy somehow. The realm thanks you for a service rendered to it that others had promised for centuries and never had the poor taste to deliver. This realm is mine, Daenerys said. I did not save it to put a lion back upon it. Tywin inclined his head as if acknowledging the weather. You did not save it alone. None of us do anything alone. That is why I am alive and why my daughter resents me. He did not turn his head toward Cersei when he said it. She still managed to radiate. We require a settlement. You require surrender, she said coldly. I require order, Tywin said. Surrender is a kind of order. No doubt you prefer another kind. Just so, Tyrion murmured. We are in agreement. This is progress. Jon spoke then, because he had learned there were moments when the room itself asked a man to speak. We cannot do this again. Cersei laughed. The dead? Or this? She spread her hands to take in the banners and the horses and the men with tight jaws. Either, Jon said. Both. Tywin watched him with interest. What would you propose, Lord Snow? Not Lord, Jon said. Not King. He looked at Daenerys and at Sansa and at Margaery and at a ragged boy who stood behind a hedge of spears and listened as if he might go home and repeat every word to a mother who would not believe him. The wheel she spoke of is real, he said quietly. I've been under it. We all have. You push, you're crushed. You pull, you're dragged. It works for the men who get to sit in the middle and call it duty. Ah, old Olenna said. The politics of millstones. I'm not a clever man, Jon said, and a small rustle of amusement rose and died among the ranks. But I know this, the thing we did in the north, the thing we did at Winterfell, that was done by men and women who did not care what house the other came from so long as the other stood when he was supposed to stand and swung when he was supposed to swing. If we cannot make a kingdom from that, we deserve to lose it again. What then? Tywin asked. An assembly of farmers choosing which daughter to send to a feast and which to keep for the harvest? A great council, Tyrion said softly, before Jon could fumble for words he did not have experience with. Called to settle claims when swords are too dear and crowns too heavy. We have precedent, though we have treated it as a story we once told the realm to put it to bed. You would have the realm choose its ruler? Cersei's scorn was almost clean enough to admire. I would have the realm choose its law, Tyrion said, and then have its ruler swear to it. Daenerys' eyes were fixed on Tywin, not on Tyrion. You delay. You are very good at it. I prefer to call it placement, Tywin said. I put things where they can be used later, including oaths. He looked at Jon. You speak like a Stark and like a man who does not want a thing he can have because he suspects he will break it by owning it. Jon said nothing. That was answer enough. Tywin turned to Daenerys. You have the stronger hand. I have the stronger city. You have dragons. I have time. We can consume one another for a decade and call it rule. He lifted his chin a fraction. Or we can put a thing before men that will not break them the next time a king is born weak and a queen born proud. What thing? Daenerys asked, though a question had already opened in her. Not what, but how much. A charter, Tywin said, as if it were a sword he could name in High Valyrian for her sake if he wished. Rights, duties, the reach and limit of a king's hand. A guarantee that when a lord breaks bread with his peasants, he will not be permitted to burn their fields when they refuse to clap when he asks. A promise that men like me, and here, at last, something almost like self-knowledge crossed his face, will be constrained by what we have agreed to in cold blood, not what we pretend is wisdom in hot. Old Olenna's eyes lit. Listen to him, girl. He is offering you a way to rule that does not require you to be better than you are every day for the next 40 years. Cersei's voice was shards. You are offering her a leash, and yourself a longer one. I am offering her permanence, Tywin said. He did not look at Cersei. And myself a way to die knowing that the vault will not be looted the moment the lid closes. Daenerys was very quiet. Above, Drogon wheeled, and the specks of men on the ground tilted their faces like flowers. She felt the eyes. She felt Tyrion's hope like a hand on her back and Jon's steadiness like a stone at her feet. She felt the habit of her anger rear and paw the air, glorious and stupid. She did not climb it. We will write your charter, she said, and we will sign it, and then I will sit the Iron Throne. Tywin's mouth moved, perhaps to smile, perhaps to concede a peace in exchange for the board. You will sit it so long as the realm believes you are less dangerous than the alternative. Which you will endeavor to provide, Tyrion said. Which I will endeavor to avoid needing, Tywin returned evenly. He looked at Jon. There is a thing yet. It will come whether we invite it or not. We might as well choose our seats. Jon frowned. What thing? Truth, Tywin said. Varys will have told you as much. He is a firm believer in the efficacy of facts. His gaze touched Daenerys, returned to Jon, and lingered. Who you are? Jon's jaw tightened. I am Jon Snow. You are what the North made you, Tywin said, and what the South once hid. The world is a table. The names we put on it are its legs. Take one away and it wobbles. Break one and it falls. He looked, for the first time, older than himself. There are truths I could use like knives. I am not going to, which does not mean no one will. Daenerys felt something cold fall through her. Tyrion's hand closed on the edge of the saddle, and he did not know he had gripped hard enough to numb his fingers. Jon stared at Tywin as a man stares at a road he has walked in dreams and never found awake. Why? Jon asked. Because I want this to work, Tywin said simply. Because I am tired of cleaning up after children. He flicked his eyes at Cersei. Because I have done much harm and would like to set a brace under one pillar before the house creaks again. It did not get easier after that. Papers were not less sharp than spears. Scribes bled time. Lords bled patience. Men with small seals strutted. Men with large swords sulked. The Tyrells argued about grain measures with the meticulous malice of people who had always believed a loaf was an argument to be won. The North demanded the right to keep its old gods and its thick clothes and its stubbornness. The Ironborn demanded things and were told to go drown and ask their god. The Dornish sent letters that laid the world out as if it were a dance floor and then refused to dance. Amid it, a softer conflict grew quiet and slow. Cersei tried to break the truce with wildfire in catacombs left over from a madman. Qyburn helped her until he realized that Tywin was not merely capable of catching him, but of being disappointed in him, which somehow stung more. Cersei sent letters to Euron that promised him women and shores and a crown if he liked it. Euron sent back bones and jokes. She poured wine at night and walked the corridors of the Red Keep with bare feet and a candle as if she could burn her father out of it by touching everything he had arranged. She watched Tommen learn to listen when Margaery spoke. She hated the queen for being as good at it as she was. The night she went to the Old Sept to pray to gods she had never trusted, she found Jaime there with his head bowed and his golden hand, resting against the cold stone as if to remind himself what weight felt like. She did not speak. She stood long enough to become angry at herself for standing, and then left. Tywin did not notice her absence. He sat with a quill and reworded an oath so that it would bind a lord who wanted out and comfort a peasant who wanted in. He put aside with a small, private smile a clause that would have given the hand power to dissolve the council at will. He was tempted, he was not foolish. He wrote into the charter that wildfire would only be kept in certain cellars, and that those cellars would be sealed with wax that carried 3 seals at least. He wrote that kings could not cancel debts by fiat. He wrote that lords who took bread from their people would pay with coin first and with land if coin failed. He wrote, knowing he was writing a letter to a world that would misread it, and knowing he would write it anyway because he did not know another way to test if men could be better than they had been when he had been a young man and decided that they could not. When at last Daenerys Targaryen sat the Iron Throne, it was not with a city burning. It was with a city crowded, loud, hungry, curious, and slightly bored. She wore a simple circlet that Tyrion had insisted upon because crowns that bite leave marks men draw back from. Jon stood to her left and Sansa to her right, and the hush that went through the hall when the Stark girl took her place was not respect so much as surprise that such a thing could be and not break the floor. Tywin watched from below with arms folded and thoughts meticulous and cold. He did not smile. He did not frown. He felt something like fatigue and like accomplishment, the way a man feels when he has moved 20 stones and knows 19 will be moved back in his lifetime but one might not. When the shouting ended and the kneeling had been done and Margaery had kissed Tommen's brow as if to fix goodness in him with lips, when Varys had drifted in the crowd like smoke and Olenna had watched it all as if it were a particularly long sermon that she was tolerantly sleeping through with her eyes open, Tywin found a quiet corridor and leaned a hand against the cool wall. Tyrion found him there. The corridor smelled of dust and of air that had not yet learned the new rhythms of a palace with fewer secrets in it. They stood 5 steps apart like men who had planned it. They had not. "You did not lose," Tyrion said into the quiet. "No," Tywin said. "Neither did you. Nor she." "We shall see," Tywin said. Tyrion came a pace closer. His mouth tugged sideways. "I kept you from being killed on a privy. I regret it often. Not today." Tywin's face did not alter. "I did not keep you from killing a good man who would have been a bad king. I regret it sometimes. Not today." They regarded one another, 2 men who had more in common than either liked and who had finally arranged the world so they did not have to say so. Tyrion lifted his wineskin and then thought better of it. He put it away. "Do you still think men are unimprovable?" he asked. "That we are only better when a man like you takes a cudgel to our backs?" Tywin looked at the floor. He thought of children who had learned to fear him and so learned to fear the wrong things. He thought of a charter in careful hand and of a young woman on a black dragon who had not burned a city because a small man had said please. He thought of a boy king who was learning from a wife how to use gentleness as edge and not blur. He thought of the North insisting on keeping its gods and of the South conceding it without a fight because it turned out not to matter to the price of bread. "I think we are improvable when it costs us," he said. "I think we need to be made to pay first and to enjoy it afterward." He inclined his head a fraction toward the throne room beyond. "We have arranged a bill. We will see who pays it." In the months that followed, they discovered that the charter was not a cure. It was a wall that required men to stand on it. Men did in numbers large enough to matter. There were still knives. There were still riots. There were still men who drank and beat their wives and lied about it. and there were still lords who thought that all paper-mint was a thing to sign with a flourish and ignore. There were still girls who went to market and did not come home because men had used them up and left their bones for dogs. But there were also magistrates who were not bought because the paper told them they did not have to be, and there were peasants who learned to speak the words of the charter like prayers and to bring them to doors like warrants, and there were thefts that were paid for, not with blood, but with labor. There were men who whispered the queen's name in alehouses not because she had burned a man, but because she had refused to. Cersei tried once more to burn the September Qyburn, declined to light the casks. She raised a cup to him and smiled as if it meant she could put him to sleep later and go alone. Jaime found her at dawn with a taper in her hand. He took it from her with the old gentleness and the new firmness, and he kissed her brow and wished he had not. And that night he left the Red Keep. He did not go north or south. He went west, to a place where men had learned to fix bridges quickly and to sit in the sun when they could. He became a man who taught boys to parry and girls to move their feet. He did not think often of kings. Tywin died, eventually, in his bed like a man who had decided that dignity after all was simply the way a man held still when the world finally told him to. He had been working until the hour before, speaking with Marjorie of Grain and with Varys of Rumor and with a pyromancer of proper cellars. He had smiled once, faintly, as if he had seen a boy in a long hall knocking over a goblet and then righting it and sitting straight. Tyrion came to the bier and stood with a face that was not, for once, a mask. "I have spent my life," he said to the dead man, "trying not to be made of you. It turns out we are all made of the people who made us, whether we like it or not." He touched the coffin once. "I am glad you lived long enough to be useful. It's more than many can say." Daenerys came behind him. She looked down at the old lion and saw, not a monster, but a razor that had learned it could be a chisel. "He kept his word," she said. "He kept yours," Tyrion said, "because it was written." She smiled, and it was a private thing, rare with her. Because it was written. They stepped out into a corridor full of new air. The city made its noises beyond. Wheels on stones, cries of sellers, the soft hush of tides combing pebbles. Far to the north, a wind moved through pines around a rebuilt wall. Far to the south, children played with sand on a beach that had once burned green and now forgot. The wheel did not break, changed the way it turned. Men learned to step off to rest and step back on again when it was time to pull. In the high blue, Drogon cast a shadow over the city as he wheeled, and the people did not scream. They looked up and pointed and told visiting cousins how it had been before, when the world was fire. They bought bread. They argued price. They went on, and that, in the end, was the victory that counted. Not that one lion fell or another dragon flew, but that men had time to live between those things and put grain into bags and kisses into the right mouths and stories into children who would grow up believing that law was not a lie you told to stop a knife, but a thing you could take to a door and expect to open it if you knocked long enough. Jon Snow stood on the city wall one dusk, hands on stone warm from the day, and watched gulls dive like men with faith. Sansa came to stand beside him, quiet as snowfall. They did not speak for a long time. "Do you miss it?" she asked finally. "The North," he said. "Every hour. Why don't you go?" She asked as if she were asking why a man did not turn his face to a fire when he was cold. "Because they need me not to," he said. He smiled, small. "I'll go when I am no longer necessary." "Then you never will," Sansa said, half teasing, half true. He looked out at water that had once boiled with old hunger, now only moving as it should. "Maybe that is what we asked for when we were children sitting in the mud and wishing to be important." He huffed a laugh that had no meanness in it. "We should have been more careful." "You would have been," she said. "I would not." They stood long enough for the sky to go purple and the first stars to decide men had earned them for the night. A bell rang somewhere in the city, a call to prayer or to supper or to work. It did not matter. The sound went out and men answered it. In the Dragonmont, tunnels breathed heat and glowed faintly, and Daenerys sometimes walked them alone. She visited the chamber where the old eggs had curled like secrets around one another. She thought of a father she had never known, and of a mother who had died making her, and of a brother who had died trying to be made again in a different shape. She thought of a man who had taught her to trade fury for plans. She thought of a small man who had handed her words like tools. She thought of a boy who had refused a crown because there were too many other things in the room. She thought of a city that had not burned and of a dragon that had. Of a charter that had been signed and would be chewed by rats and still survive because men would rewrite it and write it again, and again as often as it took. Sometimes, when the wind is right, a city learns to breathe with the sea. King's Landing could be such a city. Not noble, not pious, not good, but better sometimes than it had been. There were days when the smell of shit and smoke was less and the smell of baking more. There were days when gold cloaks carried a drunk home instead of taking his purse. There were days when a woman shouted at a magistrate and was not whipped for it. These days did not line up neatly. They did not make a season. They made a weather men could adjust to. Tywin Lannister had lived long enough to see dragons shadow the Red Keep and not panic. Long enough to see a queen who did not need him and still used him. Long enough to see a son who hated him refuse to let him become small in death. He had not found redemption. That would have required him to think he needed it. He had found utility. In his way, that was better. And when people told the story later, as people always do, they made of it a shape that fit into mouths. The lion who lived to see fire come and did not flinch, the girl who came with fire and learned water, the wolf who stood between them and insisted they put away their teeth long enough to speak. They told it with more blood or less, depending on the audience, and more love or less, depending on the teller. They stamped names on it and made songs. The truth was quieter and the truth was better. The truth was in charters and ink and in grain tallies and in boys who learned to plane with straight and girls who learned to bleed men without knives, with words. The truth was in scorpions unstrung and in wildfire sealed behind walls and in men who had learned to be ashamed of using it. The truth was in a world that did not end because men chose, for once, to do something that did not make them feel exciting but did make them live. On a winter morning that was more light than frost, Tyrion woke with a headache and sat up and heard, far off, a bell he had not heard before. It was not a sept bell or a market bell. It was smaller and clearer, ringing from some new hall the masons had just finished near the fish market where the charter had put a magistrate and decided disputes about nets. The bell rang because a case had been settled and a man had agreed to pay and another had agreed to accept, and the bell was the sound of the result. It was a ridiculous bell. It made him smile. He thought of his father's mouth twisting, of Daenerys' face set against the urge to burn, of Jon Snow's eyes plain and hard. He thought of what it had cost to ring a bell so silly in a city so old. He got up. He had work. He always would. The wheel turned, smooth enough to walk beside now without being caught. He poured water and winced and drank. Outside, the city was already loud. The sea said what it always said, in and out, in and out, in and out. Above it, for a moment, a black shape crossed and the shadow touched his face like a benediction. He put his hand there as if to hold it a breath longer, then let it go. The day began. It was not a new world. It was the old one, amended. That was enough.